Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the US government is the biggest, they have the biggest amount of debt in the entire world. They have $36 trillion worth of debt. They know that the value of that debt is going to keep decreasing. They're going to be able to pay back less money in the future than whatever the real value of the money that they borrowed today is. Even with interest. Let's say if interest is 2% and inflation is 7, 8, 10%, you're gaining 8% by borrowing this money by having some bank created out of thin air for you. I think that's pretty much the principle. When, let's say, for example, if somebody wants to buy a real estate property and they want to use it as a rental property, they can buy it using money that the bank created out of nothing. That's literally it. They can bring their future consumption to the present, and they're pretty much guaranteed to make money. If they take this risk, there's really no risk anymore at this point. The financial system is built on just people guaranteeing profits for themselves over time. Like, let's say the stock market, over time, the stock market is always going to go up because there's no risk. There's more money that's going to be added to the economy. All of that money is going to keep getting added to the stock market. And the people who own stocks are pretty much guaranteed winners at this point, in this system at least. So the reason why I think that the people who take on debt are going to be the winners is because they get to bring their future consumption to the present. Nobody knows if they're even going to have to pay back that debt, but they have this asset at the end of it. So let's say with a real estate investor, they can buy a $500,000 house. If they have $100,000 set aside today, they can buy a $500,000 house by borrowing $400,000 or whatever the ratios are. Sometimes you can get only 65% loans. Sometimes you can get 50%, whatever the numbers are. But you can borrow part of the money of that, part of the value of that house, and you can put it towards the house, and you can guarantee a profit over time. And you're using leverage to guarantee this profit. So instead of getting a 2-3% return, like the housing market would increase at 2 to 3%, you're getting 10-15% returns. So why wouldn't you continue to do this? In this current system, the debt, because the money can be created out of nothing, whoever takes on debt, whoever understands that money can be created out of nothing, is at a massive advantage. It's an information asymmetry. It's like if you were playing a game of Monopoly and the banker kept funding themselves over and over again, no matter what happened, they can never go bankrupt. Who's going to lose? Everybody else. Everybody else ends up paying for that banker's mistakes, because when the banker can keep creating more money and taking more money out of the bank and adding it to the economy, it's just going to keep increasing the prices of everything. Let's say somebody has a Park Place and they get rent on that, and they keep getting rent, and they can keep upgrading their property, and they keep charging higher and higher rents, and then the banker can keep borrowing more and more money. It screws over all the other players, but whoever owns those properties keep gaining and gaining and gaining, because they know for a fact that the property value is going to keep increasing. They're going to be able to continue to charge more and more in rent over time. It's how it works in real life too. If you can corrupt the financial system, if you can corrupt the basis of the entire system, the monetary system, if you can corrupt that, then you've basically won before you even started the game. We go back to the housing example. A landlord can go and borrow money to buy a real life product that everybody needs to survive. Everybody needs shelter. They can borrow money that's created out of nothing, and they can buy that real life good, and then they can charge other people for borrowing that good from them. Just that alone, like, it's crazy to me when you think of it that way, because you're extracting value from people who are actually creating value, and you're giving that value to the bank. So the bank is going to get interest no matter what. You're going to get your rental payments no matter what. The people at the bottom are the ones who are screwed. I think the thing that a lot of people haven't even considered is that more and more people are willing to not live in a house. More and more people are willing to live in their cars. And I think that just that mindset, if that spreads with a lot of people, it's going to break the entire system. Because if people don't have demand for these properties, then how are the property values going to go up? If nobody's willing to pay the rent on these properties, how is the rent going to continue to rise? It won't. This is how the system is built. The system is built on this fake foundation, and that foundation is debt. If people stop paying back their debts, the entire system collapses.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about just deflation and inflation, and how Bitcoin, I look at it, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of look at, Bitcoin captures inflation, this printing, and we kind of have noted that, but also deflation, which you alluded to, which is people leaving these other asset classes, waking up technology, or they're losing their job or whatever it is, and then they're pulling monetary premium from these other assets and then putting it into Bitcoin. So it captures both worlds, which I've on Twitter recently, I've had some conversations with like, crypto bros and all, and it was just like blowing their mind. They're like, what do you mean? Like, what does this even mean? Like, they couldn't even wrap their minds around this. So I would love for you to kind of touch on, these couple of points, whatever kind of strikes at you here. But I think it's very important to just, get that kind of education out there.
Yeah, for sure. So the way that I see it, I think Jeff Booth probably put it best. The natural state of the world is deflationary. So just to put it into perspective, if there are more dollars chasing houses, then the price of housing is going to increase. Over time, more and more dollars are chasing houses. More and more dollars are being printed, added to the economy, and they're chasing houses. So what's happening is the price of housing is going up and up and up, and it'll continue to rise forever in terms of dollars because the dollar can be created out of thin air. Dollars are easier to produce than houses. So because dollars are easier to produce, you can create more dollars. You can use those dollars to buy houses. And that's just going to bump the price of housing up forever. Whenever there's quantitative easing, whenever there's more money being added to the economy, whenever governments borrow more money, whenever the US government borrows more money, the price of housing is going to increase because more money is being added to the system. Technically, the US government will never have to pay back its debt because it can just roll it over. It can just borrow more money to pay back its debt. And to me, that's just absolutely insane. But when you look at it from a Bitcoin perspective, because Bitcoin is becoming harder to create more of, we see that the price of everything is decreasing. So fewer and fewer Bitcoin are chasing houses over time. Over time, let's say in the beginning, from 2009 till 2012, there were 50 Bitcoin being produced every 10 minutes. So at the time, it took 12 seconds to produce one Bitcoin. That's how I would say it. Over time, it's become harder and harder to produce Bitcoin because it takes more time, more energy, more effort to create Bitcoin. In 2012, it went from it went from 12 seconds to produce a Bitcoin to 24 seconds. Then in 2016, it went from 24 to 48. Then in 2020, it went from 48 to 96 seconds to produce a Bitcoin, and so on. It'll keep increasing and increasing until at some point there's going to be no more Bitcoin being produced. At the same time, it becomes easier and easier to produce everything else. So let's say houses, we get better at even digging let's go with digging foundations. Before, you used to use a shovel to dig a foundation. We didn't have the technology. However it worked, I don't know. I can't tell you the historical references, but before we used to dig with our hands. We used to use our hands to dig a foundation, and we would make a foundation for the house. And it would take us a week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, however long it would take. Whatever it took back then, the number of people that it took back then, it takes less time, effort, energy to produce that foundation for the house. So now, instead of having 10 people digging holes, we have one tractor operated by one person digging that hole so much faster, and we're now able to dig more holes than we could back then. So over time, it's taking less and less energy, effort, and resources to dig the foundation for a house. And what that means is that we should be able to produce more houses. We should be able to increase the abundance of houses in the economy. And that's not actually happening because dollars are being added to the economy faster than we can improve the building of houses. So we can't speed up the production of houses as fast as we can speed up the production of dollars. Does that make sense?
Yes.
On the other end, it's exactly the same thing, right? With houses, you can make it easier and easier to produce houses. Like you could make it easier and easier to produce dollars before, but it becomes harder and harder to produce Bitcoin. So the same amount of Bitcoin won't be chasing the same number of houses. Fewer and fewer Bitcoin are going to be chasing the same number of houses because that Bitcoin is being redistributed. There are only 21 million Bitcoin. So right now, the price of a house is 4 Bitcoin. The number of people who have 4 Bitcoin to spend on a house is going to decrease. Eventually, there's going to be nearly nobody who has 4 Bitcoin to pay for a house. And on a Bitcoin standard, the way that I see it, you can't really take on debt because there's massive counterparty risks. In the current financial system, banks can keep giving you debt because they can print more money. If you default, they just print more money and they make themselves whole. On a Bitcoin standard, they can't do that. So if banks want to lend you money and you default on them, they're screwed. So they're probably not going to give out mortgages for houses. They're probably going to let you borrow against your Bitcoin. But what this is going to do is it's going to decrease the amount of people who are able to buy houses. People can't bring their future consumption to the present anymore. Today, people can bring 30 years of consumption to the present. They can bring their next 30 years of consumption to the present and they can pay interest for it. on a Bitcoin standard. I don't think this is going to happen. So what this does is, as there's less demand for houses, as people have to save for houses, instead of having to instead of being able to buy a house today and bring 30 years of consumption to the present, what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to save for, let's say, 5 years in Bitcoin to buy a house. And what that does immediately, in the immediate present, what that does is it decreases the demand for houses. If the demand for houses decreases, house prices drop. If house prices drop, more people can afford to buy houses. If more people can afford to buy houses, they can spend more of their income on things that they love to do. Maybe they can become more of a creative. Maybe they can create more content on YouTube, like us. We're saving in Bitcoin. We can pay for our lifestyle, so we've put in the effort to start creating more content, things that we love, and over the long term, all this is going to do is decrease the cost of living. It's going to just keep decreasing the cost of living because Bitcoin becomes harder to create over time, while dollars become easier. Everything else becomes easier to create over time. Bitcoin is the only thing that becomes more and more difficult to create over time. Even gold. We're probably going to find ways to produce gold out of nothing, like we did with lab-grown diamonds. We're probably going to find ways to bring more gold into the economy. Let's say there's a lot of information about how we can mine asteroids. I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't know if that's going to happen. But if it's a possibility, if there's this uncertainty there, people are going to want to dump their gold because they're expecting that this may happen in the future. What Bitcoin does is it gets rid of all of the uncertainty. You know for a fact that there's only going to be 21 million. You know for a fact that there's only ever going to be this maximum supply of Bitcoin. Everything else will keep becoming more and more abundant in comparison with Bitcoin, and entrepreneurs will be incentivized to produce more goods and services to accumulate Bitcoin. So what we're going to see is we're just going to see this massive deflation because more and more goods and services are going to be added to the economy. In terms of Bitcoin, prices will all come down because fewer and fewer Bitcoin are available to be exchanged for those goods and services. Over time, like I've said this in videos, I think I said this earlier, over time, Bitcoin runs out at every single price. So depending on what you say that price is, let's say, for example, houses used to cost 64,000 Bitcoin in 2011. Today, if you have 64,000 Bitcoin, you have $6.4 billion. How many houses can you buy with that? 15,000 houses. And to me, that's crazy. So the people who saved that Bitcoin, there's not that many of them. How many people have 64,000 Bitcoin? Probably maybe 1, 2, 5 people in the world. The number of people who have that amount of Bitcoin is going to run out until they're not willing to pay for your house in Bitcoin anymore. So eventually, we're going to see today that the price of a house is 4 Bitcoin. It's going to drop to 1 Bitcoin. It's going to drop to 0.25 Bitcoin. It's going to drop to 0.1 Bitcoin. It's going to keep dropping until you're basically paying next to nothing for houses. So anybody who saves in Bitcoin today will be able to accumulate more of the things that they want in the future.
It's so beautifully said. It's in a way, it's not flipping supply and demand on its head. It's just the monetary layer is flipped on its head and puts consumers and producers on the same side of the table, right? And that's what fiat doesn't allow. It's always a combative zero-sum game to an extent, and that's where this aligns everything. And man, you put that so beautifully. It's boy.
Sorry to cut you off. I think in the current system, the prices are determined by consumers. On a Bitcoin standard, it'll be determined by savers. I think that's the main difference.
Real capital. And capitalism needs actual capital, right?
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah.
You said that so beautifully. I mean, that was the first time I've ever really heard it put that way. Like I've heard it explained in certain ways, but you came at it from, I always look at it just from, I guess, how I asked you the question initially of just, hey, I'm seeing the benefit of just owning real money, the only true money we've ever discovered. So I'm pulling my premiums. And so you have utility in real estate, we'll say, and then a monetary premium. And I'm stripping my monetary premium away and I'm moving it over to the actual money. Now the real estate just has utility. So that's the way I always looked at it. But you explain it from a supply and demand point of view, which is fascinating. And again, no one really talks about it in those terms of like, hey, even the sense of like, hey, I own the hardest money in the world. So I'm not going to pay 1,000 Bitcoin for that house. I'm only going to pay 1, so like, it's going to have to be driven down to that point where and that's just, wow. Yeah. I love the way you said that. That's beautiful. And speaking of utility too, I'd love to ask you this, like you always see from gold bugs or which again, a recovering gold bug, myself type of thing, right? Real estate guy, all this stuff. And so you have this world of, and you get a lot with the altcoins too. It's like utilities, everything. Like there's no intrinsic value in Bitcoin. There's no utility. And it's like, one, you have to just be like oblivious to what Bitcoin does and all the applications that Bitcoin has. But how do you handle that when someone's coming at you with this utility? Because we kind of touched on this utility versus monetary premium, but how do you attack that?
If you want the answer to that question right there and you like that spicy clip, check it out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. But if you want the full interview in its entirety, all the spicy clips put together, and you're not going to want to miss it, believe me, then check that out here. Come on, we'll see you in there. Do it.